Good morning, all. How are we? Good. Excellent. All right. Look at that title. What a doozy. Okay. Look, I want to share with you. It is a very heavy topic. It's just talking about it with Odie earlier on, that it's not something we really want to talk about, and it's definitely something that we don't really want to address deeply, about what the Bible talks about, where our position is on spiritually judging. That's obviously the main block that it comes under. But the question is who is going to heaven and who is going to hell? And we'll look at Romans 10 later to expand upon what actually is the Bible teaching about it. If I asked you the question, well, sorry, just before this, this is going to be in two parts, and it's broken up into 4 parts now, and then another 4 parts later on. And I want to ask a question: how many churches are there? How many churches? One church. 1. 2 brave people that will speak. That's great. That's right. There's only one church. Now, for the sake of condemnation to anyone, to myself and that, I want to look at that answer of the one church and spiritual judgment of who does go to heaven and who does go to hell at the very end. So after part 2, when I'm back up here next time, I will be talking directly about Christians judging who should be going and who should be going to heaven and who should be going to hell. And what does Romans mean by what he's saying there? And also I'll be directly talking about thinking, and then obviously our thoughts are useless when they're just thoughts. It's often expressed in confession, so that is speaking out loud or signing for the deaf. Who should be going to heaven and who should be going to hell? And like I said, it is a difficult topic to preach on. I'll try and break these up where you're not left lost. You know, a good sermon, I believe, always ends with a personal and upbeat, because there is a solution, and that solution always, from Old Testament, from Genesis right to the end of Revelation 22, it's always about Jesus being the solution. Now, I've got 20 minutes. I'm going to try very, very difficult, very, very hard to do this. Is my goal for this year. So I've already got a couple of prompters in the audience to let me know. So I'm going to ask you a question to start off with. Who is confident that they are going to heaven? Who's confident of that? Oh, hands up or hands down if you know. I want honesty. Are you confident that you are going to heaven? How, in the answer that you've just given, how do you view God? Is God a God of love and forgiveness, or is God a God of rules and judgment? Now, I'm not going to give you can choose both answers. I want, what's your view, your overall arcing view about God? So you only have one choice out of those 2 questions. For the sermon, I do want to make it clear that from this point on, when I talk about churches in the plural or another church, I'm going to refer to directly about other denominations. Now, of course, there is only one church. We've already said that, we've already established that, we've already agreed on that. What we're going to define is who belongs to that one church. But just for the simplicity of when I refer to churches in the plural, of course, there isn't pluralism in the church. You know, we don't use the churches of Christ as our title. We do use it as our title, but of Christ is not the operative word in the Greek. A couple of verses earlier, he says for the churches of the Gentiles. So the operative word in the Greek of the church is the church, the called out, not the end bit of it. It could be the church in the metro church. It could be the church in Galatia. As I said in Romans 16:16, the church of Christ, the church of God, the church of the firstborn. But for the for the simplicity of this lesson, keeping it simple, as we know there is only one church, and that is that kingdom of those that belong to the Father, our God. So we're going to start off with Christians are added and supported and made righteous by God. Most of the text we look at, not all, most of it is going to be in Romans, because Romans is an amazing book to sort this out. Now, I don't have time to read the whole lot. I've got it highlighted up there, the important bits, but I'll pick it up from 16 as I read the text, and I think we're starting at about 18 up there. But I want you to listen and embrace what is being said here, what Paul is saying in Romans. For if the first fruit is holy, the lump is also holy, and the root is holy. So are the branches. And if some of the branches were broken off, he's talking about the Jews here, and you being a wild olive tree, the Gentiles, were grafted in among them, and with them became a partaker of the root, God, and the fatness of the olive tree, Jesus and the church. 18, do not boast against the branches. For if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. Will you say then, branches were broken off that I might be grafted in? Well said. But because of unbelief, they were broken off. And you stand, you're grafted in, you're there because of faith. So don't be haughty, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he may not spare you either. Therefore consider the goodness and the severity of God on those who fell. Severity, but towards you, goodness. Goodness. If you continue in his goodness, not your goodness, his goodness. Otherwise you will be cut off. For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery. And it's talking that word there, the mystery. Lest you should be wise in your own opinion. You must stay focused on the point that I've said. Otherwise you will become wise in your own opinion. And that blindness in part was happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written. That is not a path, that is not, just to make it clear, that's not a pathway to bring the Jews back into the method of salvation. It's Paul explains it. He goes, the Jews must enter through Christ. That's from here and the future of eternity. The deliverer. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them. This is my covenant. When I take away their sins. In 30. For as you were once disobedient to God, yet have now obtained mercy because or through their disobedience. Paul here in Romans, he makes it crystal clear that God chooses. You don't. I don't. God chooses who he is. If he can rip out a whole nation that was bred through the line of our Saviour from Adam and Eve, he can take out one or two. Likewise, if he can graft in a whole nation that came from the line of Esau and the Gentiles, or even preceding him, but in reference to him, then he can definitely graft in the individual. They were cut off because of unbelief, not because of their lack of ability or their lack of knowledge. Had nothing to do with it. Faith, their lack of faith, their lack of belief. Verse 20, I love it. It uses the word kupselos, which is Greek for high and lofty and mighty. Above, thinking that you're above someone else. In verse 20, which is up there, do not be haughty, but fear. Paul is literally saying, don't be high-minded on who you are as a Christian. Don't be high-minded. Don't think that you're better than someone else, another Christian or someone else. That's that's haughtiness. He's literally talking to the faithful here, remember? Or those that were, remember we're in epistle theology, those that were making mistakes with their faith. So don't be haughty. Don't think you're there because you're so great, because you understand this and because you know this, but be thankful because God has added you. And just to make sure that we are clear between the difference, there's a massive difference between confidence and happiness and haughtiness. Confidence and happiness is in God. I love that last song because it says, in God's strength we stand. I don't want to be strengthened in myself, by myself, because of my own strength. I want to stand in the strength that is Jesus Christ. High-minded haughtiness is when you think you are better or above or deserving. Literally and specifically in context, you are more deserving of salvation than someone else. It's because you might think you've earned it or you deserve salvation more. And also, just to clear up in this verse here as well, when he talks about fear God, fear is not for the faithful to fear God. He says it up there. It's for the haughty, for those that think that they deserve to be there, or they are more Christian than someone else, or they've got more sins forgiven than someone else. Fear is not there if you love God. Fear is there if you are haughty or high-minded, thinking you're saved by something else other than faith, which is available to every human being in this world. So if your message, your gospel message stretches further, Paul makes it clear when he says, for what, Christ died in vain? Now he's talking about those that think that they can get any sort of restitution with God by their works or how good they are or how smart they are. He makes it clear. If that's the case, then Jesus died in vain. Romans 11 flows on, just to keep it in context. I won't read this, but it flows on into the theme of the living sacrifices in 1 and 2 of 12. It says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. That's how 12 is opened up. It's all one thought pattern here. It's all one theme in the Greek and in the Hebrew. But note, importantly here, in the introduction to 12, as we see it, it is not your goodness that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice that is holy and acceptable to God, but only through God's mercy, through his love and through his mercy, can you present yourself before God. Exactly the same thing. Then 3 to 8. If you've got your little study Bibles, great. Use your little titles there to put it in context. The title there, 3 to 8, is Serve God with Spiritual Gifts. But listen, it's not because of how good you think you are, what you've learnt. It says God has dealt to each one a measure of faith, ... etc. God gives it. That's the context that he's talking about here in Romans, and he drags it out right back to chapter 8. Then he goes on to behave like a Christian. Let love be without hypocrisy, abhor what is evil, cling to what is good, be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honour, giving preference to one another. If I'm going to stand there and judge my brother, whether he's going, or someone else, whether they're going to heaven or hell, am I honouring them and giving them preference above me? Certainly not. The idea of the root here in Romans 11 and into 12 is that the root is what feeds and sustains the branches. And of course, that root is God. I'm going to ask you a question. When we just read Romans 11 and the themes around 12, does it sound like we're in the presence of the Father as his sons and as his daughters because of what we've done? Do you get that idea when you read Romans? No, not at all. Definitely not at all. As a matter of fact, I would say you'd have to be pretty brave, or I'd say pretty stupid, to say or to suggest that. Because Romans makes it crystal clear that we're all Christians, and we're called Christians because of what God has done to the individual. And that is shone a light, pricked their conscience through the Holy Spirit, and given them a road to salvation. All humans become Christians and the Father's children in the Father's care because of his grace and because of his love towards us all individually. That's the only way. God grafts in through Jesus and the Holy Spirit. That's the method that he chose. End of story. End of story. So again, like it says in verse 20, don't be haughty and think or focus on yourself as the one that's being there. There's enough abundant grace and love and care in overflowing amounts from God to shower everyone that calls on his name with that grace and with that salvation. But focus on the goodness of God that we've been saved. It's the goodness and the magnitude of his love and the amount of pouring out of his love that he can save us. In John 8, now just before I read that, John 8 is all about, you'd be familiar with this book, it's all, this part of the book, it's all about the Jews basically opposing Jesus. Everything Jesus went, I'm this, no you're not. Oh, you do this for this, but no they're not. You know, that's the idea here, okay? It's all in opposition to what he taught and who his people are. And in verse 31, it's about the dispute over whose children Jesus' opponents are. So to the Jew who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold, now to the Jew who had believed him, oh, this is who we're talking to. Jesus said, if you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and that truth will set you free. They answered him, we are Abraham's descendant and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free? Then Jesus replied, very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. See, Jesus' testimony here that he's making is that I, Jesus, has set you free. You will know the truth. The truth isn't some hidden secret mystery found in the Bible like some, people sort of look to find. The mystery is the gospel. The mystery is Jesus Christ crucified, and that salvation is freely yours through faith, through trust in him. If you believe in him, if you believe in Jesus, you will be free. That's a statement that he makes. 2 Corinthians 3, 4-6 says, now we possess such confidence through Christ towards God. Not that we are adequate. This is one of those passages. Listen to what it says. Now we possess such confidence through Christ towards God, towards the Father. Not that we are adequate in ourselves to consider anything as from ourselves. But our adequacy, he's saying, is the way that we can stand before the Father is from God, who also makes us adequate as servants of a new covenant, covenant of faith and of grace, not one of law. It's not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. God and only God's love and grace places us before the Father with confidence before the Father. When you have that confidence, that's when you can call him your loved and adored Father, the Father that you want to run to and give a hug to. Not a Father that's going to punish you, but a Father that loves you. What is the mystery of godliness? In 1 Timothy 3:16, it says, and without controversy, great is a mystery of godliness. What Jesus has done and our belief in him is a mystery of godliness. To Christians, this is the worst kept secret, isn't it? Because we all know it's the work of Jesus. We all know it was the predestination of God to have salvation through the Messiah, through the one that would kill Satan and cast him eternally into the pit. So it's the worst kept secret, this mystery, to Christians. But nevertheless, epistle theology, he has to bring them back into some sort of rules and let them know straight out how it is. And Paul goes on to tell Timothy to explain to the Ephesians and to the churches in Asia Minor there, without controversy, there's no argument. There is no controversy about this point at all, about the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh, was justified in the Spirit, was seen by angels, was preached among the Gentiles, and believed on in the world, and then received up into glory. Okay? The first point, this mystery is without controversy. So nothing to hold on it. Nothing, no one can hang on any part of this. What part of this mystery, remember this mystery is our way to get to the Father. What part of this mystery is us? But 2 points in there, in that verse. Hearing or preached among the Gentiles. That requires you to hear and to believe, to have faith. That is it. That is it. That is all our part is, to hear and to believe. That has to be the foundation. If your foundation is extended from that, then you're adding to the mystery. If your foundation is extending more than hearing and believing, believing is not as the devils believe. Believing is belief that has an active faith. That's the start. That is the core. Is our belief and our faith and our trust in Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, in chapter 4, the very next chapter in Timothy, Paul goes on to teach what the great apostasy is. So he goes on here in 3 to say, this is the great mystery, that it's all what God does. You hear, you believe. That's your part. The rest is your journey with God, your walk with God. He goes on in chapter 4 to teach about this great apostasy. And he says that those, I'll read it out to you in verse 1, it says, now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron. It's above the gospel message. They're adding their own words. They're adding their own methodology. They're adding their own reasoning. He says it straight out. Jesus says it, teaching for commandments the doctrines of men. He just says straight out that they're just wicked demons that add onto that mystery that he's preaching about in chapter 3 of 1 Timothy. Deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron. They believe it. If they're adding more to the gospel message, they believe it. The people, they will believe it because their conscience has been seared. That means they're no longer touched. They no longer can be opened up. They can no longer be hurt or feel anything. It's been scarred. Their heart has been scarred. False teachers have departed from the faith because they add more to being a Christian than the now revealed point in Timothy 3, which is the great mystery of godliness. The only Christians, now I'm going to use that word very loosely here, right, because of the topic of what this is about, are those that want to make righteousness more than without controversy. He literally says it, without controversy, this is it. This is the answer to the mystery. So any Christian, loosely, that wants to make righteousness more than that are putting controversy in there. That's the point that he's making. And that's those that seek their own righteousness. And of course, it goes on to talk about the great apostasy. Those that think whether it's by works or goodness or how good you are, or a whole list of things that you must do to be a Christian. The new covenant, as I wind up, I think I'm going about right, am I? Right, have I gone long? 5? Literally the next slide. So the new covenant is one of spirit and not of rules. We read before in Romans that Moses wrote of the law that leads to death. But the new covenant is one of spirit and life. In 2 Corinthians 3, 4-6, it reads that, now we possess such confidence. Now this confidence of the new spirit is that gives us life at the end of that verse there where it says, and who also makes us adequate as servants of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the spirit. For the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. Our confidence and our adequacy has to always stay on the fact that God planned our way of salvation through this guy that was going to come up called the Messiah. And that's, of course, Christos, Christ in Greek. That's it, 100% that method, 0% from ourselves. So as a conclusion, the mystery is without controversy on how to become a Christian, how to be saved. Jesus makes it clear, if you believe in him, you are free. God is the root that feeds, that puts us in there, and he is the root that feeds us and sustains us, the branches. And the last point, because of that, because of what he does, we don't rely on anyone else or our own understanding towards it. We have 100% confidence because of what Jesus has done in going to heaven. That's our confidence, because we don't look at ourselves, at our own adequacy. We look at the adequacy when Jesus said on the cross, it is finished. We believe that. It is finished. Salvation has now been brought to mankind. Next time, we're going to look to conclude part 2. We'll look at another 4 points, and that's the sin of the wicked who judge other Christians, the law of liberty and love, Then it'll be God blesses all Christians with different levels of faith, ability, and understanding. And then the big question, which I've left to the end. So, who is going to heaven and who is going to hell? And then making so-called spiritual judgments if they're there in order for us to judge our brethren or other Christians. All right, thank you, guys.